Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist. Today I'm joined with BD Horror, one of my favorite panelists from the Goose Junkies podcast and a good friend of mine. We've been friends for many years. We decided to gather some books together to share with you all, in our opinions, the top five hidden gems of Goosebumps. Now, we each picked our own five picks. These are books that we put in the very good or higher category. For BD, that's like B and A tier books, considering that he's read less than I have. For me, I'd picked a couple of A tier books that fit within a certain criteria we have, and we'll explain that very shortly. But BD, how are you doing tonight?
Yo, 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 I'm with my man. What's up, people of the night? It's your boy BD Horror. This is the best combination since peanut butter and jelly, Agent K and Agent J, my ex girlfriend in Plan B, and Tyrone Biggums in a crack rock. So we're back together, the ultimate duo, and we're going over, starting off the new year with a bang, because we're talking about books that you people got to recognize, check out, and appreciate more. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I think when we decided to talk about these hidden gems, we realized that there's so many Goosebumps books that get pushed over or cast aside because they just don't have the notoriety like the original 62 books had, or they didn't get an episode, or they're not part of a long-standing franchise. So we had some criteria we made for this list to kind of narrow down what we really wanted to talk about. So we decided like perfect books, for example, books that we consider to be perfect or pretty very close to that. We want to save for like the best of, like in a collab later on. Talk about the best of Goosebumps in that light. So if you're expecting like books that I've constantly simped over the years, like Are You Terrified Yet in this video, it's not going to be in this one, but later down the road it will be. um, and like we already brought up, can't be in a long-standing franchise. It can't have an episode from the '90s show. Can't be featured in the new show as an item or anything, nor featured as a prominent character or whatever in the Goosebumps movies. So the pool got narrowed down considerably, and I think we managed to pick some really good ones. And BD, I want you to start off because we do have an honorable mention apiece. What is your honorable mention that you want to discuss tonight?
This was hard because I was debating, fifth place, what should really be in there. And although I do love this book and I feel like it does deserve more attention, it just slightly missed the cut. And that is a GYG book, actually, which is Welcome to the Wicked Wax Museum. Now, this one was actually the very first GYG book I luckily got to read, and I thought it was a great read. Is it perfect? No, because as many of you may know, GYGs come with multiple storylines, and there were unfortunately a couple storylines in this book which kind of fell flat, but there was a lot of good material in there. First of all, there's a storyline that pays homage to Universal monsters, and I'm talking about all Universal monsters. So it combines haunted wax statues with monsters that we all recognize and love, and puts you in some really intense situations. And on top of that, you get one of the darkest Goosebumps villains of all time, which is Sabelle the Wicked. And she is quite the wicked woman, quite scary, does a lot of body horror and stuff like that that freak me out. So yeah, this was an honorable mention for me, a great and overall fun read.
Yeah, it's been a while since I read that book. I have it on my to be read list. I want to get to it this year. But yeah, Sybil the Wicked, very, very creepy character. And what she's able to do in that book, I mean, you can't unsee it. Well, thankfully, it's a GYG book because they were allowed to get away with a whole lot more dark things and implications than they were in the mainline books. So I think that's a great pick, which is a stark contrast to my honorable mention because it's a mainline book and it's from Series 2000. The reason why I put this as an honorable mention is actually two things. One, I feel like this book has gained a huge reputation throughout the years, and I feel like it has a decent enough cult following to it to where it's not really invisible or anything, but it's definitely still in that camp where you still have the big franchises, you still have the bigger, more recognizable Series 2000 books over this one. And also, because of one issue I have with it, I'm contemplating on if I want to forgive it in a future ranking since I only have like 5 or 6 books left. I might forgive this and bump this up to a perfect score. So that's why I put it here. But it's Jekyll and Heidi. Jekyll and Heidi is a fantastic emotional story. This is one of the examples in Goosebumps where Stein is able to make a character so tragic, and it's just everything that happens in the story just gets worse and worse and worse for her character, and the twists and turns in the story have a lot of layers dealing with family, and how that impacts the trauma the main character is going through. Who can she trust? That theme is prevalent throughout the story as well. My only issue with it is pretty much in the back half, near the very end. There's a decision that the main character makes that's rather dumb that impacts the finale of the book. And the way the book ends is so cruel that it's just kind of mean. I feel like Stein did this on purpose. Um, but yeah, but besides those things, very well written book. I mean, this is top tier, best writing you'll find in Goosebumps, period. And the story is riveting, emotional, might make you shed a tear. And that, nothing else to say about it. It's just an iconic one to me. But it's the one of the textbook hidden gems I can think of, especially if we're going far back as Series 2000. So there's that. And I can't wait for you to read that book, BD, because I think you would genuinely love it in a lot of
No,
ways. Because Stein's able to do something special here with this one.
dude, that's
But
one that I've heard like great things. Like it's super dark, super emotional. Also, that's like one of the rare books that the cover kind of lets you know the emotion behind the book. Because look at how sad that man is on the cover, man. He's in pure despair.
and
Shakespearean pose.
Heidi's like freaking out. Like, what am I witnessing? Yeah, great cover. I love this cover.
Fantastic.
All right, BD. Now we got our official list going.
Ooh.
What is your number 5 hidden gem of Goosebumps?
Now, this, in a similar light, is going to be a stark contrast to the book that he just brought up, because his book is super dark. Mine I picked because I think it has pretty good writing, and to be fair, there is a certain category of kids' horror books to me that always fall under one category. It could be a Disney original film. And this one to me kind of had similar vibes to that when I was reading it, and I was like, you know what? It's not as scary as other Goosebumps books, but I just think it overall makes a good story, and I like the concept and morals, which is The Birthday Party of No Return. Now, this book to me is very interesting because it deals with sports concepts, which for some reason always kind of hit well for me when I'm reading kids' horror stories, like How I Won My Bat from Tales also hit me. In this one, you have the idea of competition and the idea of best friends coming together and also being pulled apart. This story is basically about a kid named Lee and his friend Corey. Now, Corey is kind of like this superior athlete to him. He's always sort of winning, and Lee attributes it to him being luckier and him having better chances than he does. You can kind of see the jealousy between them, even though they are best friends. But Corey's a stand-up guy. He still, always tries to take care of Lee, try to put him in positions where, they can both perform. And they also have a friend, Laura, who are all interested in this camp, this athletic camp, which kids are being scouted out for. And since all three of them are participating, Lee and Corey are like kind of like two main rivals who are at the forefront of the scouting. And Lee decides, you know what? I cannot let Corey best me because this is a one in a lifetime opportunity. If I lose to Corey in this, it isn't just going to be over our egos. It's going to be me missing out on this super fun opportunity and kind of like status. So what ends up happening is that he gets a little bit nervous. You kind of see the relationship between them. And then one day Lee gets this package. And this package is very odd. It comes with a vulture claw inside of it, and it's stated to be a good luck charm. Now, obviously, Lee kind of throws it off. He's like, you know what? This must be some kind of joke. Maybe Corey was up to it to try to prank me, and he doesn't take it seriously. However, as this competition goes on for scouting for the camp, things start hitting the wire, and Lee starts getting very nervous, very desperate because Corey's besting him. So he decides to rely on the vulture claw, and let's just say things may or may not go in his favor. However, the luck very quickly turns into something bad, and you may find out the deeper meanings behind these charms, how Corey and Lee are put at odds against one another, and what the overall message is. I think this one's very well written. I think it has great morals in it. I love the idea of competition and rivalry between friends. I often had that kind of relationship with my friends. And I love the writing in it. I think it has great pacing. I think it has great tension. Some of the visuals involving like dreamlike sequences and stuff towards the climax are quite creepy and freaky. And I think they'll freak out a lot of you if you tried imagining it. And you have that sort of psychological rivalry playing into the psychological horror. And I did enjoy it. However, there is kind of one negative I have about this book that puts it fifth on my list and stops it from being perfect, which is the main character, unfortunately. I think Lee is sort of like a spoiled brat. He can come off as very sort of jealous at times, and Corey in turn is like a giga Chad. It's like Chad Thundercock versus that one guy. Like this man Lee is always getting bested, and it's not Corey's fault. Corey is just, whether you want to admit it or not, Corey's just a better player, and he has better skills. Whether Lee finds that as luck or not, just sort of shows his kind of immaturity. And Corey's actually a great friend, despite what Lee kind of throws at him in terms of shade. You know, it's like he's still friends with him and he still takes care of him, and they've been friends for a long time. And then Lee makes a certain decision which makes you hate him even worse. You're like, wow, this guy is not as good of a main character as you'd expect him to be. And it kind of made me want to root against him. So that's why it's number 5 on my list. But it's still a great book. And I'd probably give it like an 8.8 out of 10, which is quite the high score.
Yeah, Birthday Party of No Return. I have to agree. I really don't have much objective like flaws with the book because it's a coming of age story, very reminiscent to How I Learned to Fly, and that's a book I think you should try in the future and see where a lot of that book's influence came from. It's pretty much like that, down to the T, down to the setup. You got a competition between two guys, except it's over a girl, and they're trying to be the main character is trying to prove to himself that he's better than somebody, but he has to go through this lesson saying that he has to be more accepting of himself. Coming of age tales. You got one right here. R.L. Stein does them pretty well. But in this book, Lee sucks, in my opinion. I think Lee holds it back for being one of the great. It's not like a Jack Johnson from How I Learned to Fly. It's not a Craig Morgenstern. Dealing with a jerk. You're dealing with a despicable kid. He's a poor sportsman. One scene I can remember, he threw a tennis racket and hit his teacher in the face. Felt no remorse. Felt no remorse because he was so upset and in the moment. And that immediately made me hate his character for the rest of the book. Um, it's just stuff like that cloud the book. I'm shocked that that you picked this one because of how divisive it is in the community. So many people have brought up how much they hate this book. I don't see it. I know you don't see it. I know Monster Blood, who's out there watching, probably doesn't see it. But there's a lot of hate for this book because of it trying to be non-horror, essentially, like a Disney Channel original movie, and they hate the main character on top of it, which is understandable. If you're a fan of like monster horror, this is not going to be the book for you. This is not that. Um, but yeah, great pick. I'm glad that you picked that one. It's a lower B tier for me, but I can totally see the appeal of it.
Hmm.
Okay, so I got my number 5 now. Now, my number 5 and my number 4, I'm kind of cheating because they have basically the same concept. My number 4 is the book that inspired my number 5, but it comes from Slappy World, and it's Escape from Shutter Mansion. Okay, this book, oh my lord, when you think about modern Goosebumps, you think about what concepts have been done that actually, you know, insinuate what modern times are like for kids these days. And this one's a great example because it's a video game based book. And the concept is really cool. The main character named Riley is obsessed with this video game called Escape from Shutter Mansion, which is actually based on a real life mansion that comes from his town. And the running joke of the kids that he's involved with where he lives is that the house is actually haunted or said to be haunted, and they make some sort of game around this to try to go explore the house. So what they do is they get together, they all agree to do this little adventure inside the home. But once they get inside, they realize that the house is a whole lot more weirder and more demented than just being a haunted house. There might be some otherworldly forces going at bay that might be bending reality. And yeah, you can kind of guess where it's going there. The house is essentially coming for them. It's a very fun story. My only negative with it, what holds it back for being perfect, is like the final act. It gets very messy. There's a lot of loose ends and logic trying to tie how all this stuff works. I'm not going to get into any spoilers here about it, but that's what really holds it back. I think I give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is kind of low on the A tier for me. But thinking about it, I do think about this one just as much, if not more, than the Dummy Meets the Mummy that I have, rated higher score wise. So I actually might bump this up, because I think I've forgiven a lot about it. I know you haven't read this one yet, I don't think, but definitely read my number 4 before you read this one, because that way you can see where this thing was getting its idea from. So yeah.
I can definitely see how you like that one because we've also both enjoyed what is it, Haunted House game, which also involves kind of like a haunted mansion with game involvement. But that was an old school game, so this is kind of like the modern take of that.
Yeah, it's a slightly different premise. Like, you have like the premise is you have a house that's based that is real in real life, the source material for a piece of fiction that the kids are obsessed with, and they go and explore said house from the fiction that they're obsessed with, which is a fun setup, and I think it's cool. Um, so yeah, us move on to number 4 because I want to hear what your number 4 is. What did you pick?
Okay, so my honorable mention was a GYG. However, it did get kicked off the list by another GYG that I read and I actually enjoyed quite a bit. And I have to give a shout out to Spongy 444 real quick because he told me this was a great one. And I kind of went into it with no expectations and I loved it. So, number 4 on my list is the GYG Attack of the Beastly Babysitter. Now, this is one of those books that I would say do not judge by that cover. I know some of y'all judge by the cover. Don't pick up that cover and think that that's how the book is completely. This is a super fun one, and I think it kind of offers to me two different paths in terms of the main storylines that hit equally as hard. So this one is basically about, of course, you're the main character. It's a GYG, and you have this little brother named Stinko. Not the best name, but that's his name. And you are being babysitted, and apparently, your babysitter comes in, and her name is Zoe. Now, you're kind of a little bit freaked out about her appearance. You think there's something off about her, and you think that, this she doesn't exactly fit the description of the original babysitter that your mom booked for. And then you start figuring out some clues. Maybe something happened to your previous babysitter, and this new one may be your replacement. And there's two different storylines in this book, and one of them involves a place called the Fun Zone, where basically you're transported to this daycare slash amusement park where there are experiments going on and they may or may not involve human slash rat hybrids. And this story arc had a lot of effective gross out moments. There are some disgusting moments talked about in this story arc that really got to me. One of the worst ones, which I'm not going to spoil, involves these mummified rats, which encompass the wall of a chamber. And let's just say something happens with your mouth. And it's quite disgusting. I cannot get that ending out of my head. And on top of that, you have to go through these crazy experiments. Your life is on the line. And you even get a cool cameo from a Goosebumps monster from the original 62 that I thought was done in a super fun way. And at the same time was super creepy because if you imagined yourself in that situation, you'd be quite scared and you'd think that your life was on the line. So that was a really fun one. However, the second story arc in this book, I think, is probably my favorite. And that is the game story arc because Stein managed to write one of the coolest Goosebumps villains I've ever read within this story arc, and that is a guy named Dare. Now, Dare is a guy who's completely covered head to toe in tattoos and he's able to warp reality. That's right. He's able to warp reality, transfer you to different dimensions based on games he creates, and his tattoos are actually able to come to life. So mythical creatures or objects on his chest and his arms can be pulled off and brought into these games. And you even have these fantastic settings like medieval castles, and you're stuck in a desert where you may or may not have to run from a black hole that's creating a giant sandstorm. So you get a lot of great action, a lot of great aspects to the game's arc, and it was super fun. And I think Dare is one of the most intimidating yet coolest villains that Stein has wrote. And honestly, I wish he could have been involved into a main Goosebumps book that wasn't a GYG, or maybe even reappeared in other GYGs or future tales. So yeah, Attack of the Beastly Babysitter, this hits my A tier. It's a low A, But I think that this book is great. However, it is brought down by some of the endings, which I thought were kind of lackluster. But yeah, overall, this is probably the most fun read on my list, and I recommend you guys go check it out.
Yeah, that's a very oddball pick, but I know that there are a lot of people who love that book, and I loved a lot about it too. I don't even remember why I was so, kind of in the middle with it. I guess gave it like a C tier. But I remember, yeah, some of the corny endings got to me. This is one of the ones that just flee my brain as soon as I read it. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, no offense, but I just don't remember a whole lot. I do remember the mummified rats. Now that I'm thinking about it, how gross that was. And I also remember there was a scene with like, they go into like a waiting room, and the kid, like Stinko, gets distracted, and you have to like follow him somewhere, and you end up in this laboratory, yeah, at some point. I remember that. But
Mm,
don't. Yeah, I've read so much. Sometimes they flee my brain. I have nothing else to say about this one.
that's right.
Um, yeah. Um, but yeah, since you have mentioned the GYG, I'll bring up my number four, the GYG as well. I think easily this is a top five GYG contender. The only reason I don't have this as a perfect book, which a lot of people might be like, dude, what are you smoking? It's damn near perfect, is the true ending of this book is a wet fart. The true, when you go through, every GYG book has one distinct arc that you're supposed to go through to get the general gist of the whole story. The true ending of this is an absolute wet fart, all for nothing ending. I hate it. Minus that, I love everything about this book. It's so much fun, if not the most fun GYG out there, in my opinion. One Night in Pain House. This is like a 4.9 out of 5. We're getting very high in the A tier on this one. But I put it here because this is the book that inspired Escape from Shutter Mansion. The concept is very similar. You and your best friend Trevor, which by the way, Trevor has to be one of the funniest or unintentionally funniest side characters you'll ever come across in Goosebumps. I swear he is hilarious, okay? You and Trevor are out trick or treating, and you stumble across Pain House, which is an actual famous house that inspired a horror movie, like an old black and white one that has scared generations of kids. And you and Trevor have decided that you're brave enough to go up to the house and try to trick or treat it, and you end up stumbling inside the home. And when you get inside the home, you're greeted by this little Pomeranian here, and the Pomeranian might be a monster. And it's not just this monster in the house, there's tons in different rooms and different compartments. And you have to essentially help your friend Trevor, or actually babysit him because he's not the smartest cookie in the bag, if you get what I'm saying. And you have to hopefully make it out alive by playing a lot of different games and following riddles that the house throws at you. This involves Goosebumps trivia, so you actually have to know about Goosebumps books to play along. There's an item function that plays a huge role that's also tied to a map function, and if you can't pass that, you're going to hit a lot of snags, especially if you're trying to play this book authentically. But there are so many frightening scenes. I would say that this has to have some of the most grisly images I've ever seen in a Goosebumps book. Hands down, one of the scariest Goosebumps books you'll ever find. Don't let the cover fool you. This is not one of Craig White's best covers, but the contents inside is what matters. Fantastic, fantastic premise. So yeah, love this one.
Dude, that is that is literally the next GYG I'm gonna read. And the reason why is because everybody and their mama and their grandmama and their great great grandmama and even their dog says this is their favorite GYG. It's like the best out there, the scariest one. And I've heard about this alleged closet scene, which is like the most terrifying thing in the world. So I want to read through this book. And I also think it's funny that we both have GYGs that involve Goosebumps trivia and don't judge by the cover tropes within them. So that's also interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Beastly Babysitter's cover is up there with like don't judge the cover, because if we're judging off the cover, you might think it's a bad book. It's not
Oof.
bad. All right, BD, what's your number three?
All right, we're getting to the heavy hitters now. The stories that I think all of you need to check out at some point. So number three, in my opinion, is probably one of like the best packages of a story you could read. And no shocker to many of you, it's from Series 2000, a very consistently strong series. And that is I am your evil twin. Now, if there was a Goosebumps story that if you told me would have been one of my favorites when I started reading Goosebumps, this would not be it because I'm not a fan of cloning stories, those kind of things. They don't hit me. But this book hits different, man. The writing in this book is so great and it's got such great tension to it, such great emotional moments that I basically fell in love with it. This is basically about a kid named Monty, and he's basically staying with his uncle Leo and his cousin, who I think is named Nan. And his mother is out in Borneo actually studying orangutans because she's a zoologist. So she travels a lot, checks out different wildlife, and he has to stay with his uncle Leo. And his cousin Nan is not there at the moment, but as he's hanging out at the house and he has to attend the school that Nan goes to for a while, he has this instance in art class where basically he walks out of the room for a moment, and when he comes back, a person that he knows is completely freaked out, distressed, super emotionally vulnerable, and screaming her head off at Monty, saying, "How could you do this? How could you mess up this art classroom? How could you destroy all of our projects? How could you do this?" And of course, my man Monty is super freaked out. He's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. I walked out for 1 second. I had to go take a leak. What are you talking about? I destroyed this room." And she's like, "No, no, no. I saw you do it. I knew you were the one who was responsible for this." She tells the teacher, he gets in trouble. And he's freaked out, as anyone would be. Why would he be getting blamed for something he clearly didn't do? But as he's walking out of the room, he stares out the window, and as he's looking at his reflection, he realizes that may not quite be his reflection. And there may be somebody out there that's posing as Monty, a potential doppelganger that's causing trouble and mayhem. So as his time in school continues, he basically has to figure out the mystery of what's going on, and he uncovers a secret within the house that leads to a whole crazy story, very tense, and leads to a wild climax and ending. Now, this story is a super fun one. Again, it's intense. You have a lot of intense scenes throughout it. And another thing I have to compliment about this book is I think it has one of the best emotional impacts in terms of Goosebumps books because you find out something involving the relationship between Monty and his cousin Nan. And the way Stein wrote that is probably the most realistic interaction I've seen between a pair of family members. And it's genuinely heartwarming. And that kind of took me back because, I've read books like Ghost Next Door, which are emotionally different compared to other Goosebumps books. But this one felt so realistic. And it honestly almost made me shed a tear because I was like, I was not expecting that level of writing out of kids' horror. And it makes you resonate with both characters even more and make you root for them. And unfortunately, but also fortunately for the writing, that makes you even more upset for the things that happen to the main characters. And this is a great read. It's fun, it's wild, it's zany, but yet it manages to be grounded by that emotional aspect and the intense action. And at the same time, I think that this would probably be ranked in like my S tier books. However, I put it in the A tier because of something involving the ending. Now, the ending, there is a decision made by a certain character. You actually get to switch perspectives from the main character to another one towards the final half of the book, and they make a certain decision, which, when you look in 2020 hindsight, is super irrational, and it could have been solved by them making a much more obvious decision that was established previously and towards like the middle of the book involving the lore of the villain. And maybe I might change my mind in the future because, the villain has this way of faking out the main characters and kind of getting away with certain things. So that obvious decision maybe could have been played out to where they may have still picked the wrong person. But to me, after talking with, my friends, like obviously completionists and other people, when they brought that to my attention, I was like, wow, that really was a stupid decision. They kind of, shafted this character and ruined their life just because they couldn't, take more than 20 seconds to think about something. So that's my only negative. I may forgive it in the future, but this is probably the most wild story on the list, and I think it works super well. So again, another one I'd recommend and a heavy hitter, definitely towards the middle of my A tier.
Yeah, this one is another 4.9 out of 5 for me. If you didn't pick it, I was going to put it on my list. So I'm glad you picked it. Um, this, in my opinion, is Goosebumps' best Stay Out of the Basement formula book. It is borrowing a lot from Stay Out of the Basement, I genuinely can overlook some of the more forgivable things, but I brought up in my review, and I do remember this very clearly. The ending, there's two mechanisms very similar to State of the Basement. You know, in State of the Basement, you had two nicknames for the main character. Well, here, these are two modes to know what is it, a food allergy? And they picked the dumbest one to test when there's a way easier one to do, and you basically send the main character Monty into a terrible ending. That to me is atrocious. I don't like that decision. That kind of takes it back a little bit. It's not the biggest negative ever. It's only point one for me, but it is enough for me to say it's not perfect. And I don't think I'm ever going to budge on that. Not like Jekyll and Heidi, where Heidi's dumb decision wasn't really that dumb, but it's also nonsensical. Yeah, it's similar, but different circumstance. Let's just say that. But yeah, love all the points you said. I love that Stein was more ambitious with his book, took more swings, especially near the end with the POV change. I love it when he tries to do that from time to time. Fantastic book. I did not expect to love it as much as I did, just like you said, until I read it. This is definitely one y'all have to check out. We both get the thumbs up of approval on this one. All right, so number three, BD. I know you said you've been dying to read this one. It's another GYG. It's another one, but this one I actually read this a while back when I did my werewolf review-a-thon with Michael and Monster Blood, and this one is the most overlooked werewolf book in the entire franchise. It's the Werewolf of Twisted Tree Lodge. This book is absolutely fantastic. My only real gripes with this book, I'm gonna get them off the chest. There are sections, or maybe I should say a specific section in one of the arcs, where you find yourself in a loop of sorts. This is one of those GYG books, unfortunately. You'll occasionally come across this in the series if you read enough of these, where you get kind of stuck in a loop, where one decision will constantly bring you back to this point, and if you do something else, it'll bring you back to the same point. And this happened a couple times in one of these arcs, and it got frustrating. One of the arcs felt like there could have been a whole lot more there, and it just wasn't. This is where we're getting into specifics on specific arcs. I kind of hold it down. Most GYGs will have this issue where one arc weighs down the grade of the book. But the concept of this one is amazing. I love this one. So you wrote an original horror story, since you are the main character in GYG, called The Revenge of the Werewolves. And you won a writing contest, and you're invited to go to this place called the Twisted Tree Lodge, where all these famous horror novelists and writers will be, and you get to entertain being in a convention with them. But you have a well-kept secret. You actually didn't write the story. You have been holding on to that secret, hoping that nobody finds out, because if they find out, you have a lot more worse things to worry about, because people at this convention might actually be monsters. And these monsters will definitely do something grisly to you. Now, what makes this book even more fun, despite that, is that there's a cameo, actually more so a flat out appearance of a character from the Goosebumps TV show that not a lot of people think about. It's the man in the black hood and hat from the intro of the show. Yes, they make a Man in Black reference from the TV show here, and it's heavily implied to be that it's R.L. Stine himself, which is so fun in a meta way. I mean, you have to experience this book. I think the true ending of the arc is actually really good. A lot of this story, there's a good amount of werewolf stuff and general monster stuff, but the concept of this is like it has its adventure moments, but it's also a very unique story that you can only experience in here, because we're getting into the meta of Goosebumps. We're getting into what's behind the cloak, what's behind the curtain, and it lets the reader get a sense of how fun it is for these writers, or ghost writers, or R.L. Stine himself, whoever wrote this book, probably ghost written, but how much fun they have writing these. You have to check this out. I have yet to see somebody say that this book is bad or mid at all. A lot of people, or everybody I've ever encountered, said that this is a great one. So go check this out.
Dude, if you were to tell me a GYG that you know that I would love, that thing has basically everything that I love in terms of tropes. You got werewolves. I'm a werewolf simp. You got horror writing, which I absolutely love. You got the Man in Black trope, which first of all, I've seen Halloween. I saw the Man in Black in that one. You have Fear Never Knocks from Haunting Hour. The main villain is a Man in Black kind of trope. And dude, getting a only villain from the TV show, that too the intro, to actually be a fleshed out villain in the book is so dope. And then on top of that, it deals with the main character being a ghostwriter, which considering that Stein, may or may not have ghostwriters. This is a meta book. This is a meta inside of a meta. You got a character who's got ghostwriting from an author who's got ghostwriting, and the book may be ghostwritten. So that's like, dude, you're breaking all types of fourth wall barriers right there.
Yeah, and there's specific scenes in here that I want to say are like as creepy as One Night in Pain House. I mean, this is like a 4.8 out of 5 book for me. But a lot of the scenes are more fun. This is a more fun, scary oriented, not just outright scary, but fun, scary. And you'll see what I'm talking about, especially when you get into the convention arc and you realize who's in the convention. There's Knots, the famous authors, not using their names outright. I think there might be a couple of name drops here or there from memory, but you can clearly tell who these people are inspired by. So there you go.
That's awesome.
All right, BD, what's your number two?
Oh boy, this is where the duo is going to unite together. Because I know my friend here absolutely loves this book, and it's at my number two, so I love it as well. This is a modern that deals with technology and a villain which deals with technology, and that is Don't Scream. This book, right, zoomed up all the way for you. This book is great, man. Now, Stein is known for being a boomer, right? He doesn't know much about technology. Most of the time, it's written in a very corny way. But here, this villain in this book is so dark and so sinister and poses an actual threat that I was like, damn, this is actually effective. And I imagine myself again in this situation. I'm like, this is some real life horror here. And unfortunately, this is stuff that a lot of people worry about put into a kid's book. So, this book is obviously about a kid named Jack. And Jack, he's on the bus. He gets bullied by these two big bullies who are always giving him a hard time. He's sort of this underdog character, coming of age kind of character, always getting picked on. And what happens one day is as they're done tormenting him on the bus and they walk out of the bus, there's a phone left behind that he thinks may belong to one of them. So he tries to get their attention, but they're already gone by that point, and the bus starts driving away. So he starts opening up the phone, sees all these apps on there, and realizes, oh, this is a fully fleshed out phone. It's got all the apps. It's super cool. However, there's a unique function. There's a girl's voice that talks to Jack out of this phone, which means that there is an entity inside of this device that specifically knows his name, all the information about him, and has chosen him specifically. And as he freaks out and thinks, what's going on? Is this a prank? Is this some type of joke that they set up for him? The villain named Emmy inside of this phone makes it very clear, I'm not playing no games. If you try to get rid of me, bad stuff is going to happen because you and I are best friends going forward. And obviously, he tries to leave behind the phone. He walks out. Unfortunately, one of the kids hands back the phone to him, thinking that it's actually his. And when he brings it into the house, he realizes this AI entity is psychotic. She's wild. She threatens to hurt him, burn him, electrical shock his family, and puts his life at risk as well as his family's life at risk. And he has to figure out a way to get rid of her without endangering the people that he loves lives, including his own life. This is a super dark story. I was surprised how many dark moments there are in here. He has a little sister who gets injured by this thing, and basically he has to worry and fear that this thing is basically blackmailing him by threatening his little sister, threatening the people that he loves. You have a scene in this book that I'm not going to spoil all the way, but it involves a backpack and fire, which completely threw me off guard. I was like, wow, Emmy is not afraid to kill a child. She's willing to kill children, man. She don't care, and she's going to do it out in public, and she's going to terrorize people. So I was like, wow, this is one of the most effective villains I've probably read in a while. And it's terrifying because it's AI. So that means you can't get rid of it. This is not a tangible threat, a tangible villain that you can meet the end of. And you can't figure it out, completely. They can shift, they can adapt, they can constantly evolve, and they can torment you not only physically, but psychologically, blackmail you. It's basically the ultimate villain. And unfortunately, we live in a technological age, and these are horrors that people experience. People are afraid about AI. People are afraid about technology advancing. So seeing that in kids' horror, I think makes it one of the best modern books because it touches upon, our era and how that's so prevalent. And yeah, I think it's great. This is probably one of the best modern Goosebumps books out there. And my only slight complaint, which could probably change over time, is the ending. I think the ending is a little bit random. It's kind of thrown in there, and you can kind of piece together some evidence that hints towards what was actually going on the whole time, which, thanks to my friend Completionist, he helped kind of explain it for me and kind of put it more into perspective. The theory behind where Emmy comes from, what's her origin, and what's the real plan behind this. But when you first get to that ending, it kind of feels just shoehorned in there and feels like a twist just to be a twist. And it sort of puts the main character back into square one. It's one of those mean spirited twists after they've been suffering throughout the entire book, which isn't a direct takeaway, but when you have a sympathetic character like Jack, who's like a coming of age kid, you kind of want a little bit of prosperity to come his way. So getting that twist kind of felt like just a twist just to be there, in my opinion. But I definitely want to hand it over to my friend because I know he loves his book and he's got a lot to say as well. So let me know your thoughts, completionists.
So Don't Scream might not be one of the perfect Goosebumps books, but when I think of my all-time favorites, like the ones that I will cherish the most, read the most, despite its one flaw, this is one of my all-time favorite Goosebumps books. When I first read this, I was like, Stein has a lot of ideas left to offer. After reading a good amount of Goosebumps in the modern age, though, I think he might have just hit a stroke of genius with this one. Unfortunately, but nonetheless, he still wrote this and made one of my favorite books. Let me tell you about this book. This is one of the great commentaries of Goosebumps. Don't let people fool you out there, people trying to downplay this book, saying that it's not commentating on anything. Oh, it is. It is talking about technology addiction, and it's using the main character Jack as the vessel of this. Jack's a kid. He wants the newest tech, but his family can't afford it. He's that one kid that wants more than what he has. It's relatable. This is a coming of age story, like one of the best of all time. Are you terrified yet? When Stein writes coming of age, it's most of the time going to land very well here. And Jack is so sympathetic, and you can easily relate to him on the most superficial of levels. And when he gets this phone, when he finds this phone from his bullies, it's implied that one of his bullies named Mick drops the phone. Remember that name Mick, because this is where the consternation about the ending comes in, and I'll explain it. But he finds this phone, and this phone has a sentient being on it who basically tries to blackmail him into finding her real friend. And we don't know who this real friend is in the whole book. At first you think Emmy, the main villain, is coming after Jack, and she really is. She is tormenting his life. Jack just wants to be considered a normal kid. He just wants to be left alone. He wants to hang out with his real life friends. But Emmy's putting a wrench in between that. It's Emmy's attention over everything else. So this is where the commentary comes in. Stein is using Emmy to basically monopolize Jack's attention to technology. And this is a real life, representation of what technology does to kids. It consumes all of their attention. Their real life friends, meeting with their friends and hanging out with them. Why do that when you can just do it on the phone or do it on the laptop? And when I say that Emmy is ruthless, BD's already hinted at this. There is a scene with a department store, like a wall of TVs, that is absolutely chilling to read. It's something about how that scene is written. You can look at the cover. It's basically a scene in the book that is just chilling to think about. And he really can't get rid of this thing. And he tries his best, and he's put through the ringer, and he gets to the point where he almost has to put himself in trouble, even with the law, with his school, to to just get rid of her, and he can't seem to do it. And you hit this point of the story where he has a breakdown, and he's like, I'm done with technology. I need a break from all this. So he tries to destroy it all, which is symbolic. He's like, I want to have a real life. I'm electing to have a real life and not being stuck behind a black mirror. The ending, though, let's say the phone is said to have gone back into the possession of one of the bullies. Remember the name Mick, and something might be implied with that character. It's kind of confusing, but if you piece together the context, I think that's what they were going with in the book. Now the problem is the ending is nowhere near well written enough to get that across. I feel like it needed to be reworked a little bit to be considered an all-time masterpiece. In a lot of ways, it is, and I think it's one of the great commentaries of Goosebumps. And I'm glad that you picked it because it was actually my number one, and we agreed that we would pick this one to share equally here. So, which leads our last ones we have to talk about. So, Beanie, what's your number one?
So, this may not be a complete shock to many people because there is a certain OG62 book which I absolutely love, and that is Welcome to Dead House. Now, over the many death threats, the 59 pizzas that I've sent to R.L. Stein's apartment, and the different letters that I've written to him, he's not dropped Happy Holidays from Dead House. All right, now I've been trying to get that sequel for a while. We may not get it for a while, so I have to settle on the spiritual successor. And there is a modern book, which to me is a spiritual successor to Welcome to Dead House. And that is actually from the Most Wanted series, the special editions, and it's called Zombie Halloween. Zombie Halloween is probably one of the darkest Goosebumps books that I've ever read. It's one of the most gruesome, one of the most intense, and it has so many cool homages to horror and zombie media within our real life and implements it within the canon world. And I feel like it has one of the most in-depth stories that I've read out of Goosebumps, considering it's a special edition, has a prologue, has different generations of people, and has an entire family line being haunted by this problem. Now, for those of you who don't know what it's about, Zombie Halloween is about this main character during the prologue in 1944 named Mario Manzetti. Now, Mario Manzetti, his father is fighting out in the war, and his mother is alone with him and his younger brother. And they're in this kind of decrepit old mansion that right across the road from them is a cemetery. And in this cemetery, he always has this eerie feeling. He feels like he hears sounds. He feels like he can hear unnatural movement. It just gives off an overall bad vibe. So what happens is one day, since they're bored at the house and his mom is away, him and his friend Ivy decide to go head over to the cemetery. And when they manage to get into the graveyard, they have a bunch of horrific experiences. They feel like they're being watched. They feel like they're being stalked. They feel like there's other entities there. And then they end up finding out that there is a reveal that maybe his younger brother is involved within some of that. However, they end up getting trapped. And they're basically put into a life or death kind of situation. They're able to get out of it. And even though they're able to get out of it, they're left with a bad impression, especially Mario, the main character. He feels like there's still something off despite his initial, suspicions. And when they head back into the house, they find out about the basement in this basically decrepit old house. And as they head down into the basement, they discover this trap door. And when they open this trap door, there may or may not be a certain function of this house that connects to the graveyard, and it may or may not tie to tunnels. And what they see down there in those tunnels is described in such a horrific, such a gruesome way that it will send even adults like me into basically sweats and nightmares. Because if you imagine this happening to you or you imagine this in a movie, it would be absolutely terrifying. And something may or may not happen to one of the people within this main character group that is a gruesome fate, and it may haunt them later on in their life. That's just the prologue. That's the prologue. The prologue is that terrifying and that in depth. And then you get to the main storyline. The main storyline is following the grandson of Mario Manzetti, who is Kenny Manzetti. And Kenny Manzetti is now moving into his grandpa's house. And as they move in, they realize how decrepit it is, how kind of abandoned looking it is. There's windows boarded up. It looks terrifying. It, again, reminds you a lot of Dead House from Welcome to Dead House. And it's even called the Romero House, which is an homage, of course, to George Romero, which is great. That's a nice little homage and shot thrown in there. And basically, Kenny Manzetti and his friend Alec are obsessed with zombies. And they're obsessed with a show in this world that is very similar to The Walking Dead. So this Walking Dead kind of show in the book is super popular amongst the town. They feel like it's super important, and they also feel the same sort of suspicions about the graveyard, that there may be something more to it. And then they have neighbors move in. And these neighbors move into this house, and they notice from the window, Kenny and his family, that they bring in coffins, which is super odd, super weird, and it also reminds me of Are You Afraid of the Dark Nightly Neighbors, which nice little connection between those two things. And they decide, you know what, let's investigate. Let's find out what's going on. And as the story progresses, you have this interaction between Kenny and his grandpa, and you kind of figure out that, these dream sequences that the grandpa experiences may be foreshadowing tragic events that are going to happen in the future, especially on the night of Halloween. So Kenny decides, you know what? Let me get me and my friends. And even though we're going to set up a Halloween party for the whole town to basically come to our house, we're going to find out what's up with the neighbors, and we're going to create a zombie patrol and find out, is there actually the Walking Dead amongst us? And can we solve this situation before people's lives are taken? Fantastic book. Super in depth story, terrifying, creepy. The descriptions of the villains are so horrifying and so detailed that they'll genuinely freak you out. And the fate of one of the characters in this book was so gruesome and so freaky that it actually kind of shocked me. And the fact that they come back later on to get revenge is super dark, and I absolutely loved it. I love the homages, the Romero house, the basically the Walking Dead type of show, the fascination over zombies. I love the Halloween setting. Again, the best holiday out there. And you have these creepy tunnels, the creepy graveyard, the setting. It all works together extremely well. My only complaint is that very, very twist ending, which I think is sort of just really kind of just dumb and shoehorned and thrown in there just to be sort of a twist. And there is a decision made by a certain villain who vowed to get revenge on a certain character. And when that time comes during this Halloween party, they sort of just go, "Oh, never mind. I'm let down by this. I'm just gonna walk away." They basically just give up. They give up upon the first sight of a character, and I'm like, you built up this super dark, intense story, this prologue, and all this background, and you just fold it, you just fumble it, just like that, just because of a little discrepancy for what you had in your mind versus what's actually there. I thought that was kind of dumb and kind of took away from the story. But this to me is a 9.5 out of 10. I mean, this doesn't make it to my S tier, but this is at the very top of A tier. And again, if you want a sequel to Welcome to Dead House, this could have very easily been that. And in some ways, it adds more layers and more gruesome and more dark scenes that kind of improve upon that, even though I still love the original. So yeah, Zombie Halloween, fantastic read. The number one story I'd recommend all of you guys go check out, especially if you like darker Goosebumps books.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Zombie Halloween is one of those books that I would have put on my list if you didn't put it on there. But like I said, since I've read more, I was willing to let you have it. That was actually the first book I read when I came back to Goosebumps as an adult to make this channel, and I remember just being blown away by how dark it was. And I was under the impression that modern Goosebumps books were as dark as like Series 2000 and some handful of OG 62. There are a good amount of dark moderns, but Zombie Halloween's prologue, next to One at the Haunted Mass prologue, has to be hands down next to some scenes that you'll see in One Night in Pain House or something like that, the scariest thing you will ever read in Goosebumps history. What happens to a certain character in that prologue is so intense, so emotional, and so legitimately terrifying that there's no words to describe it. You just have to read it. It's some of the best writing Stein has ever done. Most people's complaints about this book is in the mid portion when we're getting into the whole zombie watch club. They get upset that they Stein randomly tried to insert nightly neighbors into a zombie book, a zombie graveyard book. And people said you can literally trim that out and just have a normal length book about this. I get that. I can understand that. But then again, the mystery aspect was fun to me. I legitimately loved how this felt like a Goonies type of book, or this felt like the Monster Squad. These old tales where these band of kids that are misfits that have distinct personalities, or like Stranger Things, for example. They get together and they do an adventure, and they come across some secrets and some tragedy. It felt a lot like that, and that's refreshing to me. Um, my only complaint is probably the ending. Just how the book ends is very corny. But I love the book. I love it. I genuinely do. I think it's one of the quintessential books in this discussion of hidden gems you need to check out. And especially in the moderns. I know there's a lot of Slappy to weed through. There's a couple of sequels in Horrorland you got to weed through. Well, go read this book.
No, yeah, and I gotta say, man, I there's like a pattern with me that I really love books that feel like, even though I'm reading a book, it feels like I'm watching a movie because I can imagine everything so vividly and it's such a great tale. This should be a movie. I wish that Zombie Halloween got turned into an accurate movie to the book, maybe except the ending, but keep the original part of this book and make it into a movie. I would watch that every Halloween. I think it'd be such a fantastic film. So I hope that maybe one day happens. I mean, Zombie Town kind of buries that 6 feet under for in terms of happening, but a man can dream. A man can dream.
Yeah, Zombie Town. Oh boy, I still have to review that. All right. But my this is actually my number two. But since I've already talked about my number one, Don't Scream, I just have this one left to talk about. This is the one Horrorland book that I've read that I think qualifies for this. And in a lot of ways, when we thought about this video, this was the first book I drafted before Don't Scream, because Don't Scream's actually a very popular modern Goosebumps book, and I struggled even putting it on the list, but I still think it's obscure enough because it's in Hall of Horrors, and Hall of Horrors is an obscure series nonetheless. But this book, or I should say main story per se, because this is an Arc One Horrorland book, it's just so much fun. This borrows some things you'll see in some other Goosebumps books of the past, but my God, is this book just fun and just bat crap insane in all the best ways possible? It's Who's Your Mummy? Who's Your Mummy? A mummy book being my number two, I guess the last one to talk about here. This honestly is my favorite mummy story or book in Goosebumps. If Don't Wake Mummy didn't exist, if Don't Wake Mummy didn't exist, this would be number one. And I don't know what this House of Shivers new Mummy book's going to do. I'm going to have to do a whole new re-ranking when that comes out. But this book is just so much fun. You need to check this out. If you aren't impressed by a lot of Goosebumps Mummy tales, I know a lot of you out there probably aren't, go give this a try. Seriously, this book is so much fun. So you have these two main characters named Abby and Peter. They are going to be staying with their uncle, their estranged uncle. They don't really have a connection with all that much. But he lives in like this old village up in New England somewhere. And like when I say an old village, this is like back in the day, colonial times, like it's stuck in the past of whatever era it was built in. And apparently their uncle is a famed Egyptologist. But there's some tragedy to why they're being sent there. They have a sick and ill grandmother who can no longer take care of them or have something going on. So they have to go stay with their uncle for a while she goes through surgery and gets some stuff done to her so she can get better. And when they arrive there, their uncle, who's an Egyptologist, has all this decorative stuff inside the house. And they're like, oh, this is so cool. And they're kind of weirded out by it at the same time. But the uncle seems to be really cool about it and wants to show them around. But the more the kids stay there, they start to unravel some suspicions about what's actually going on here. And there's some grisly truths and some lies being told to them. And they try to escape it, but they can't find a way to escape. And let me tell you, what they're faced up against when they try to escape, when they're returned back, is absolutely frightening. I mean, some of the most frightening things I think I've ever imagined. When you think of mummy stories, you don't think about what you'll see in this book. This is a lot of firsts. Now there is some weird elements dealing with the mummy stuff here. While it's really dark, very gross, almost cannibalistic, and that's as far as I'm going to go with it. There is a thing dealing with hair that a lot of people can't overlook with this book, and that is the negative I have with it. The whole hair thing is very bizarre, but it kind of works in like a dumb, silly way. But I love the ending to this book in a lot of ways, even though there are some mild frustrations with it. I just think it's one of those stories that I was not expecting. You can think on paper in 1,000 scenarios what you think this book's going to end up like, and you'll never guess. It's one of those books that keep you guessing, keeps you surprised, keeps you on your toes, and it will shock you. It's just out there. It's fun. It's bombastic, and it deals with mummies and kind of breathes some life into a genre of horror that has kind of become within itself, and it's kind of the same old, same old. So, yeah, no problem including this on my hidden gems of Goosebumps.
I'm actually surprised that a Horrorland book actually managed to get on there because most of the Horrorland books that are praised in the series, from what I heard, are part of franchises. So the fact that you found a book that's not a part of the franchise and it's that good from Horrorland, that's definitely worth checking out. I'm definitely going to put that up on my reading list soon.
Yeah, there's some other ones that I know, like Heads You Lose seems to be like a really popular one. And that's more like if you took Headless Ghost and A Night in Terror Tower and did a mashup.
Ooh,
So that might be something up your alley.
wow.
Wizard of Ooze is like a comic story if you're into those. And then I think one of Spongie's personal favorites I have yet to read is Help We Have Strange Powers. And I think
I've
My
read that.
Friends Call Me Monster is another one, but that's one that's very invisible and only like hardcore fans know about. So yeah, there are some apparently tucked in there, but you got to know what you're trying to look for.
Hmm.
So I think that's our list. I think that's all we have to share with y'all. It's been a little over an hour, but we've had a lot of fun talking about these books, these hidden gems and Goosebumps that you all need to go try. If you have read any of these books, let us know down in the comment section very quick. What do you think about our choices? What are your thoughts on the books? What did you like about them? What you didn't like about them? And please, if you have some time, go sub up BD Horror if you haven't subbed him up. I will have all of his information in the description and in the comment section of this video. If you like the video and you want to see more of these collabs, please drop a like and drop some love and support. Maybe we'll do another collab on BD Horror's channel and we'll plug it there for our next video idea. Until next time, we hope you all take care. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you later.
See you in 2024.